I wasn't supposed to be there. That thought clung to me like the frost in my lungs as I trudged through the snow, my breath rising in shallow bursts. The Edgell Forest had been off-limits for decades. At least, that's what the old road signs claimed. But I wasn't one for rules, and isolation was what I needed. I had left the city behind at dawn, the cold biting at my fingers as I drove farther than I ever had before. No one knew I was out here, which suited me fine. Life had come undone in the span of a week. My business partner had gutted me in a deal. My girlfriend walked out without a backward glance. And suddenly, the life I had built felt like an elaborate joke. I needed distance. I needed silence. I had heard whispers about Ebon Hollow, a frozen lake deep in the mountains, untouched by time. It wasn't on any map, but there were stories of travelers who had gone looking for it and never returned. The kind of tale people pass around campfires, twisting the details into something unrecognizable. I had found an old journal at a used bookstore months back, a hiker's worn notes describing the route in disjointed scribbles. It was enough. By noon, I had made it deep into the forest, the skeletal trees stretching toward the sky like brittle fingers. My car was miles behind me, abandoned near the remnants of a crumbling road. I liked the challenge of finding my own way, of stepping where no one else dared. But as I stood at the edge of the lake, watching the ice stretch endlessly beneath a sky too silent, I felt it. Something was wrong. The first sign was the footsteps, not mine, but another set trailing behind me. They were faint at first, barely noticeable over the crunch of snow beneath my boots. I told myself it was nothing, maybe an echo, maybe the shifting of the trees. But then they started stopping when I stopped. I didn't turn around. Not yet. Instead, I forced my focus on the lake before me. The ice was smooth, a perfect mirror stretching far beyond the tree line, untouched by fresh snowfall. No cracks, no imperfections, just an endless glassy surface. I had expected something rough, something broken by time. But this was something else. Then, in the distance, I saw it, a cabin. It stood on the far end of the lake, barely visible against the trees. A single yellow light flickered in the window, beckoning. I hadn't read anything about a cabin. No mention of structures, no signs of past life. That was when I made my second mistake. I stepped onto the ice. It didn't creak. It didn't shift. It welcomed me. The silence deepened as I moved forward, my breath the only sound in the vast emptiness. With each step, the world around me grew muted, swallowed by something unseen. The air tasted different, thick and static, like the moment before a lightning strike. Then, halfway across the lake, I heard it. A whisper. It was faint, slipping beneath my skin like ice water. My heart lurched, my instincts screaming run. But my body betrayed me, locked in place as the sound grew closer. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was words. And they were right behind me. I turned sharply, expecting, what? A person? A trick of the wind? But the lake was empty, except for the footprints. A second trail ran parallel to mine, identical in depth, identical in spacing, but they didn't belong to me. They had appeared from nowhere, stretching back toward the shore, vanishing into the mist. I forced myself forward, my pulse hammering. I had to reach the cabin. The closer I got, the more I realized something was off. The structure was old, but the light was on. Someone was inside, or something. I reached the wooden porch, my boots silent against the frost-covered steps. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. Inside, the warmth hit me instantly, a sharp, unnatural contrast to the cold outside. A fire crackled in the hearth, but no logs burned. A single chair sat near the flames, a book resting on its seat. And the moment my eyes landed on it, I felt my breath catch. I knew that book. It was the journal, the one I had found in the bookstore. the one that had led me here. But it wasn't worn anymore. The pages were crisp, freshly bound, as if it had just been placed there. A shadow flickered against the far wall. I turned. The door slammed shut behind me. The whispering started again, no longer distant, no longer faint. It was inside the cabin. The shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting across the floor, moving when I didn't. And then, as the firelight dimmed, I saw them. Figures, standing in the corners, watching, dressed in white, silent, unmoving. The realization struck me with icy clarity. I had been expected. The last thing I remember is the whispers becoming words, curling around me like a noose. "You've come back." Then, darkness. I woke up in my car, engine running, heat blasting. The snow was untouched outside, the road ahead clear. My pack was full, as if I had never left the car. But the book was still on. Noose. "You've come back." Then, darkness. I woke up in my car, engine running, heat blasting. The snow was untouched outside, the road ahead clear. My pack was full, as if I had never left the car. But the book was still on my passenger seat, and its pages were filled with new entries. Entries I had never written. Entries describing places I had never been. I've never been the kind of person who scares easily. My grandfather was the sort who laughed in the face of ghost stories, a man who thought fear was something people invented to justify their hesitation. My mother wasn't much different. "Fear only catches you if you stop," she used to say. Maybe that's why I made the mistake of crossing that frozen lake alone. Maybe that's why I didn't turn back when I should have. The town of Cindershore had long since abandoned the bridge that once connected it to the old settlement on the other side of the lake. A newer, safer road had been built decades ago, rerouting travelers away from the blackened ruins beyond the water's edge. Only a handful of stubborn old-timers still remembered that footpath across the ice. Just a whisper of a trail, marked only in fading stories. I first learned about it while sifting through the town archives, buried among tax records and land disputes. A mention of an old path, a shortcut that had once been lined with lantern posts long since extinguished. A footpath that, according to local lore, wasn't safe to walk anymore. The thing about local legends, they never stopped me, so I went looking for it. It was just after dusk when I reached the lake's edge. The ice stretched out before me, an unbroken mirror of frozen black water, reflecting the skeletal trees along the far bank. Snow had settled in uneven drifts along the shore, untouched by footprints. I hesitated only for a second before stepping forward, my boots crunching against the frost, before finding their grip on the ice. With every step, the silence grew deeper. At first, I thought it was just the quiet weight of winter, the way snow and ice seem to absorb sound, swallowing up the world until only your breath remains. But this was different. It was absolute. No wind, no distant crack of shifting ice, not even the sound of my own footsteps echoing back at me. It was like stepping into a dead space, a place where noise had been forgotten. I should have turned back, but I didn't. I walked further, my breath curling into mist, vanishing into the stillness. My mind worked to rationalize the unease curling in my gut. It was just an old frozen lake, nothing more, no reason to be nervous. Then I heard it, a sound, distant at first, a low, drawn-out wail, not quite human, not quite animal. I stopped cold. The sound came again, closer this time, winding through the silent expanse of the lake like a whisper dragged through clenched teeth. It didn't echo. It had no source. It simply existed, pressing against my eardrums like the weight of deep water. I turned in slow circles, scanning the ice, searching for movement. But there was nothing. just endless white, stretching in all directions. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Then I saw them. Footprints, not mine. They led forward, not backward, not away from me, but toward me. A sharp, involuntary breath shuddered out of my lungs. The prints were fresh, impossibly fresh. I knelt, reaching out with a gloved hand, my fingers hovering just above the indentations. A breath, not mine, whispered against my ear. I bolted. I don't remember running, just the sheer panic of movement, the wind biting against my exposed skin, the ice beneath my boots feeling thinner with every step. The wailing sound rose again, this time closer, louder, becoming a chorus of something unnatural, something wrong. I couldn't tell if it was behind me or inside my own head. The thing about running on ice? It's a fool's gamble. One misstep and you're down. I don't know how I kept my footing. Maybe I didn't. Maybe my mind refuses to remember the moments I stumbled, the times I barely caught myself. I just remember the fear, raw and unrelenting, driving me toward the shore. And then the ice cracked. It wasn't loud. It was subtle, almost soft, like a sigh slipping through the silence. I didn't stop to find out if it was the ice giving way beneath me or something else. Something waiting. I ran faster. The sound behind me grew. No longer just a wail, but something else. Something with shape. It felt real now, tangible in a way that set every nerve in my body on fire. I could feel it, right at my heels, stretching, reaching. And then I saw the shore. It was just ahead. I pushed harder, my lungs burning, my throat raw. I could make it. I could make it. The moment my boots hit solid ground, everything stopped. The wailing, the pressure in the air, the suffocating silence. I turned, gasping, but the ice was empty. No footprints, no figures. Nothing but the wind, returning at last, whispering through the trees as if it had been there all along. I stumbled back to my car, my hands trembling so badly I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I didn't look back at the lake. I didn't need to. I knew, somehow, that if I did, I would see something standing there, watching, waiting, for the next fool to cross. Aftermath. I spent days trying to convince myself that what happened wasn't real, that my mind had conjured it up, twisted the silence into something monstrous. But the thing is, I know what I felt out there, and I wasn't the only one. A week after my failed crossing, I overheard an old man at the general store mentioning the lake. He spoke in a hushed voice, leaning in toward the shopkeeper as if afraid something might overhear him. "They used to call it the Silent Crossing," he muttered. "Back before the bridge, before the roads. Folks used to walk it, a shortcut. But they stopped. Not because the ice was dangerous. No, it held strong. That wasn't the problem." The shopkeeper frowned. "Then why'd they stop?" The old man hesitated, his fingers tightening around his cane. "Because sometimes you'd hear something following you. Sometimes you'd see footprints that weren't yours." His voice dropped lower. "And sometimes folks never made it to the other side." I left the store without buying a thing. I don't know what I encountered on that lake. I don't know if it was ever human. But I do know one thing. I won't be crossing it again. Not ever. I never thought much about the lake behind my uncle's house. It was just there, an expanse of dark, still water stretching beyond the tree line, its surface occasionally broken by a heron or the gliding shadow of a fish. In the summer, my cousins and I swam there, jumping off the rickety dock, daring each other to touch the bottom. In the winter, the lake froze over, silent and heavy under layers of ice, the world around it deadened by the weight of the cold. That last winter, the one before we moved away, The lake changed for me forever. It was just after dinner, the sky a thick stretch of navy overhead. My cousin Elias and I sat in the den, bored out of our minds, while my uncle snored from his recliner, the hum of the radio droning beneath his breathing. "We should go outside," Elias said, tossing a pillow at me. "Go check the ice." I hesitated. "It's freezing out." "Yeah, that's why it's solid. Come on, don't be lame." I wasn't scared of the cold. I just didn't like the lake after dark. During the day it was fine, just water and trees. But at night it became something else. Too wide, too empty, the ice stretching endlessly like something was waiting underneath, pressing against it. Still, I followed him. We grabbed our coats and boots and stepped out onto the back porch. The wind cut sharp against my face. The lake lay ahead, barely visible, a wide black stain against the snow. Elias walked ahead, leaving footprints behind him, his breath clouding the air. At the shore, the ice gleamed under the moonlight, smooth and perfect. Elias stepped onto it first, testing his weight. The lake had been frozen for weeks, and in our town, that meant one thing. It was strong enough to hold you. "Come on," he called. "It's fine." I stepped forward carefully, my boots crunching against the frost. The ice held. We walked toward the center, the vast emptiness stretching around us. Elias grinned, pulling a can of soda from his pocket. "To survival," he said, popping it open. I laughed, feeling my nerves ease, even as the silence around us deepened. Then somewhere in the trees, a branch snapped. We both turned toward the sound. Just the wind, I told myself, or an animal. But then we saw it, a figure at the tree line, not moving, just standing there, half shrouded in shadow. "Who is that?" I whispered. Elias didn't answer. He was staring, his breath slow and measured. The figure stepped forward. Even from a distance, something about it was wrong. The way it moved, deliberate, heavy, like dragging something behind it. My stomach knotted. I didn't want to be here anymore. "We should go," I muttered. Elias nodded. We turned, walking quickly toward the shore, but something made me glance back. The figure had stepped onto the ice, not walking, gliding, no sound, no crunching footsteps, just moving, impossibly smooth, as if the ice wasn't there at all. A wave of cold rolled through me. We walked faster. Then I heard it, a distant, muffled crack, not behind us, below. The ice groaned. My breath hitched. We weren't even running, but suddenly I felt like we were too heavy, like the ice wasn't as solid as it had been minutes before. Elias grabbed my arm. "Don't stop," he said. The shore was close. Just a few more steps. Another crack. Louder this time. Then a splash. I turned, expecting to see Elias had fallen through, but it wasn't Elias. It was the figure. Gone. Only the dark water remained, the hole where it had stood swallowing everything beneath the ice. I couldn't move. The surface rippled, the cold black void stretching deep beneath us. My legs locked. My breath was shallow. Then the hand emerged. Pale, waterlogged fingers gripped the edge of the ice, pulling upward. Something was climbing out. Elias grabbed my wrist, yanking me toward the shore. We ran, the ice screeching beneath our weight, every step sending another jolt of fear through me. We didn't stop until we hit solid ground. I turned just in time to see the thing rise. Not a person, not anymore. Its body was soaked, dripping, but the water was wrong. It clung to its form, like something thicker than liquid. Its face was obscured, but I swear I saw its mouth moving, lips forming words that made no sound. Then, without warning, it stepped back and let itself fall beneath the ice again, disappearing into the blackness. I don't remember running inside. I don't remember locking the door. I just remember lying awake all night, watching the frozen lake from the window, waiting. The next morning, there was no hole in the ice, no sign that anything had ever happened. But I never went back to that lake again. And when my uncle passed years later, Elias and I never returned to the house. Because some things, some places, aren't meant to be disturbed. And I still wonder how many others have walked that ice at night, hearing the cracks below their feet, never realizing until it was too late that something else was waiting beneath them, waiting to pull them under.